There's a phrase often repeated by From Software fans that goes like, From Software has never made a bad game. As I often say this phrase myself, I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that people aren't talking about the entire From Software catalog. They're not referring to and probably haven't played Echo Knight or Enchanted Arms or Eternal Ring. They're talking about From Software's more recent offerings. The Souls games and anything that came out after Hidetaka Miyazaki became CEO of From Software. The phrase is trying to express a couple of things. First of all, that these games are of remarkable quality, and that many From Software fans have been consistently surprised at how much they enjoy each game, even if on the surface it didn't look like it was their type of genre. There were medieval fantasy fans that were lured in by Dark Souls that were hesitant about Bloodborne. Similar attitudes persisted when Sekiro was announced, Armored Core, and even Elden Ring. Now obviously these games didn't win everyone over, but most people recognize that these were exceptional. I consider all of these masterpieces that have had a big effect on the industry. So given their track record, many people have adopted an attitude of, I buy whatever they put out. I don't care if it's a cooking game, a visual novel, a battle royale. I have been delightfully surprised enough times that it doesn't really matter. I'm willing to put forward the money and trust that the game I'm going to get is going to be a masterpiece. And it is into this social environment that Nightreign comes along. Even before release, Nightreign was the most controversial From Software title, and now that it's come out, it seems like it's going to remain controversial. My own opinion before release was that Nightreign was a smaller experimental title, that it definitely wasn't From Software's next big project, it was something they were going to put out between major releases. So I was excited, the game definitely looked fun, and the roguelite elements seemed to give the game a added longevity that would tide us over until From Software announced their next big thing, but my expectations were tempered by what it was. Well, now the game's come out, and my opinion has shifted somewhat. Nightreign has proven to be a lot more than I thought, and simultaneously a lot less. So let's start by talking about the best thing about Nightreign, and that's the Night Lords. They're easily the best content in the game, they're the highlight, they are awesome. And I attribute that to them being designed from the ground up to be fought with multiple people. These are co-op bosses, and that gives them a different flavor than what we're used to in Elden Ring and other Souls games. I've often complained about Elden Ring, Dark Souls. For their co-op, in my opinion, the games aren't designed for co-op. They are single-player games that have a co-op functionality attached to them. The bosses aren't designed from the ground up to be co-op, and so have a hard time effectively dealing with more than one person. That is not true for Nightreign. The minor bosses that are reused from Elden Ring have been adapted to try and compensate for this. They're given new moves and attacks to better deal with multiple people. For the Night 1 and 2 bosses, other enemies might be added to better split the party's attention. And these are fine, they're fun, but even these are not what I'm talking about. The Night Lords are made from scratch to deal with the party. They don't struggle at all with multiple people. And they even have gimmicks that you would be advised to figure out and make use of. For example, Libra during his fight will shield himself and conjure glyphs around him. If his meditation is allowed to continue, he will receive a buff, making the fight more difficult for a time. However, if you break the glyphs, he'll be interrupted, he'll be inflicted with madness, and though his frenzy is also scary, it's still preferable to him in his buffed state. If you have your ultimate or have saved it up, then you can forego the glyphs altogether and shatter Libra's shield with that. I don't know if every character's ultimate can do that, but I've seen several that can. And this also has a cooperative element because you can save it up and communicate to your party members, don't waste your ultimate here if you have it, I'm going to use mine. That way not all 3 people are wasting their resources to break the shield. The other 2 can get ready for it. This is fantastic, and it's exactly the kind of thing I was hoping would develop as a result of From Software tackling co-op in a more serious way. It feels like a fusion between the gimmick boss fights that From Software sometimes has, and their more mechanically satisfying boss fights. They've been integrated together to be one thing. One of my biggest hopes for Nightreign was that they could learn from the experience of designing bosses for co-op, and use that experience to further refine their next game. But I don't think we have to wait for the next game. These bosses are phenomenal. These bosses are some of the best in the From Software lineup. They have great presentation, amazing music, amazing movesets. They're well balanced, they're hard, they are difficult. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that Caligo, the dragon, that one's my favorite. I think it's the best dragon From Software has made, and that's saying something given how high quality a lot of the dragons are. Better than Calamite, better than Middeer, better than Bale. Well, hang on, I don't know about that last one. Maybe better than Bale, but only if you don't have Egon there. Egon's screaming is at least 20% of the boss fight's quality. I also appreciate just how difficult these boss fights actually are. They're not the kind of thing that you can beat half-heartedly. The Night Lords are so difficult that it's not surprising if the first few times through it, they kill you very quickly, essentially turning the game into a 40-minute run back every time you die. Meaning that you have to familiarize yourself enough with how the game works to be able to get to the Night Lord at a relatively high level so that he doesn't just immediately one-shot the party while you're fighting it. And I suspect that most people are not going to be beating these Night Lords first try. They'll learn more about them every run. I think the difficulty is a big part of what makes the game fun. It makes learning what routes are effective fun, it makes fighting the Night Lord fun, and it makes actually beating the Night Lord an amazing experience, especially if you're doing it with friends. Now, another thing that it does well is the Nightfarers. Each Nightfarer leans into a different kind of playstyle. They are individual characters, they have unique abilities, and they can play in very different ways. And this is exciting for me, first of all because it's fun. Because it's fun to play with these characters. They've done a good job in differentiating them. They've done a good job in setting up the Recluse's magic system, the Duchess's unique dodges, the Executor's deflects, and Iron Eye's updated and improved archery. It helps a lot with the game's longevity when you can basically play in a completely different style by picking a different character. But apart from that, apart from just this game, I'm excited because this is a stepping stone on the path to Sekiro, or Strength Sekiro, or Magic Sekiro. And by that I mean something like Sekiro or even Bloodborne. So in Bloodborne's case, Bloodborne's combat has a unique flow, and it's created by taking away the player's shield. You're incentivized not to use the shield because it's not very good. The game pressures you into a certain playstyle. It takes away your shield, it gives you the rally mechanic, which incentivizes playing more aggressively. It wants you to be faster, it wants parries to be easier, so it gives you a ranged parry with a gun. And Sekiro is similar, it's even more focused than that. In Sekiro, you can only use one weapon, and you're really forced into this Dex Katana playstyle. You're not a blank slate, you are an individual character, and you find your own expression within those constraints. And going forward, I would like something else like that, but for a different playstyle. So I would like a Strength Sekiro, where the game is focused, but it's focused in a different direction. Instead of being a katana-wielding shinobi, you are a big man with a bigger weapon. Or they can lean into the magic. They can make a Magic Sekiro, taking inspiration from the systems they developed for the Recluse. Or even another different dexterity-focused game. Sekiro focused a lot around its deflect mechanic. But the Duchess is a nimble character that uses her dodges. Her evasions are really cool, and she even has the ability to evade in place without having to move, if she finds her current position more advantageous than moving. All of the Nightfarers are already fun to play, but I could see them being a lot more fun if they were further refined and placed in their own video games that were built around their unique mechanics. And if it's the case that Nightreign is an experimental title, that they will learn from the things they do here and bring it to their future games, then I hope that these focused character playstyles are one of them. Okay, so the game is super fun, the Night Lords are of incredibly high quality, each Nightfarer's unique abilities and playstyle is very fun, they feel very different to one another and have a lot of potential. However, having now beaten all 8 Night Lords and put about 40 hours into the game, I realized it's not going to have the longevity I expected. By the time you've finished every boss, you will have probably seen all the content. And my reason for playing now is to get all of the remembrances, to speculate on the lore, and to master the different Nightfarers' playstyles just because they're fun. The problem is that the game isn't really a roguelite, it has very minimal randomization elements. Contrary to what I assumed at the trailers, once you get good at the game, your runs will look very similar every time. The map, you will quickly realize, doesn't change. The points of interest on the map will move around a little bit, but the actual structure and appearance is always the same. Now, before release, I was already concerned about this, but my concern was just on its appearance. I thought that it would just have the Limgrave aesthetic all the time, which I thought was a complete waste, given how good the art style of Elden Ring's different zones are. Why would you have only maps that look like Limgrave when you can have maps that look like Liurnia, or the Altus Plateau, or Caelid? My fear was that we were going to get stuck with only Limgrave-looking maps. But it turns out it was actually much worse than that. We don't have only Limgrave-looking maps, we have only Limgrave-looking map. As in one. A lot of people have complained about the asset reuse in Nightreign, they feel it makes it look cheap. It's just something that they haphazardly slap together for money. But my problem is the opposite. I wanted them to reuse more assets. I would have liked them to reuse the assets that they had in other zones, to have several more maps that you could potentially start in. And which one you do land in would be a surprise every time. Looking back at my impressions video for Nightreign, I was worried that we would only have 8 maps, one for every Night Lord. And my view at the time, looking back at that video, was, oh, that's far too few, especially if they all look like Limgrave. Now, it wouldn't be so bad to have the same map if the more random elements of the game could make up for it. But sadly, they're not all that random. There's a castle in the center of the map, and what enemies inhabit that castle is random. But it's only random among, like, 4 things. The only major change that ever happens to the map is the Shifting Earth mechanic. Shifting Earth changes one part of the map into a different, more interesting biome. There's 4 of them: a snowy mountain, a crater, a eternal city, and a scarlet forest. And these are great. These are the kind of biome changes I would have liked to see more prevalent across the map. The issue is, there are only 4 of them, and they are exactly the same every time you see them. And this very minimal randomization is, I think, the source of the game's biggest problem. After a certain point, all of your runs look the same. The game is about accumulated advantage. You go to low-level areas and quickly kill low-level enemies and bosses, accumulate the weapons, levels, and buffs that they give you, until you're strong enough that you can quickly take out higher-level enemies. Usually that means heading to the castle as soon as you're ready. And because the castle only has 3 or 4 different types of enemies that spawn there, you're going to be killing the same group of enemies placed in the same place every time, and you'll probably start to notice and maybe even get tired of the trend before you even finish your last Night Lord. This is not something that's going to take you a while to figure out. One argument that I've heard in defense of this system is that the fact that the map doesn't change allows you to accumulate map knowledge. Like in a battle royale, you can choose to go to one of the higher level areas in the hopes of getting better loot, even though it's more dangerous. The problem is that in Nightreign, the goal is the accumulated advantage. Going to a higher level area before you're fully prepared, in the hopes of getting better loot to start with, is not really as effective as just sticking to lower level areas until you're ready. What you want, ideally, is to be just going through the bosses quickly. In the time it takes a low-level player to kill a higher-level boss, they probably could have cleared 2 or 3 different areas appropriate to their level, acquiring the rewards for each, and then when they do go to the higher-level area and fight that same boss, it will take less time, they don't have to be as cautious, they're less likely to die, less likely to waste time having died and going back to the boss, and will probably end up with more loot and a higher level at the 3rd day anyway. Now, the static nature of the map and the runs doesn't really matter your first time through or your second or maybe even your 20th or your 30th. Like I keep saying, the game is super fun to play, it's super fun to play with friends, and it's hard enough that you will probably lose and not notice the minimal randomization until you're much more experienced. But I think that by the time you get to the last Night Lord and beat him, it will become very apparent. And it's very unfortunate because the game has a solid foundation, and its highs were much higher than I expected. But it's not going to give me those several hundred hours I was hoping to get, given its roguelite marketing. So I guess it's an interesting problem to have. The game is so good that you wish there was a bunch more of it, and that it had a longer life cycle. My hope is that's still on the table. I know that there's a DLC upcoming, and I'll happily buy that. But I'm hoping, given its massive success, and how many people are currently playing it, that they think about adding much more content than just that DLC. If they're not going to randomize heavily, then I would love new maps with different biomes, maybe 2 or 3 different versions of each map, so you have 3 Limveld maps, 3 Altus Plateau maps, 3 Liurnia maps, 3 Caelid maps, and maybe the new biomes have different kinds of Shifting Earths that can appear in their areas, as well as new bosses and harder challenges. As it stands, though, Elden Ring Nightreign is a good game, but it has too many issues for me to consider it a great one. And whereas with the other From Software titles that I talked about before, I would insist that people try them even if it doesn't look like their cup of tea, for Nightreign, I wouldn't urge people in the same way. I think it's very understandable if people don't want to try it or don't like it having tried it, and many of the criticisms levied against it, I think, are valid. Anyway, that's the end of this video. As always, thank you very much for watching.